So I wanted to take a moment today to talk about what I am calling the beauty of anger. And I feel like that's very much like an edgy Shadow the Hedgehog type of thing to say. It's like, anger is beautiful. Also, hell. But no, I think that anger is one of those emotions that everyone experiences from time to time, but at the same time, I feel like it's often mistreated. A lot of people, whenever they feel angry, instead of using that anger in some way, shape, or form, they just suppress it and they push it down and down and down until it builds up. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I think that's a bad idea and how anger can actually help you move forward in life. I think that really at its best, anger can serve as a guide for you. Oftentimes we only know that something needs to change whenever we're upset about it or angry or pissed off or whatever. I think there are a lot of reasons why people suppress their anger instead of putting it to use. Most notably, people do horrible things whenever they're angry. People say hurtful things, or they physically hurt people or abuse people. They make bad choices and they justify it because they were angry. And so whenever I'm talking about anger, I want to first off acknowledge that there's a reason why people are scared of anger. Angry people who do not control their anger are not fun to be around in the slightest. And so I just want to acknowledge that up front, that anger can be a very dangerous emotion in the wrong hands. And so whenever I'm talking about the beauty of anger, that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm talking about at all. But rather I see anger as being a kind of energy. Anger can be a driving force that can help you change whatever it is you need to in your life. And in a lot of ways, I think that as long as you're channeling your anger properly, I think that it can help you push further than you would have any other way. So as I'm saying, I feel like anger can be a kind of guide. It can be a kind of compass almost. If you're angry about certain things in your life, that can be a sign to you that something needs to change. So I'll tell a silly story real quick. I used to work at an ice cream shop, and basically I was promoted to a manager. I was promoted to a shift lead shortly after getting hired there. And I didn't have any sort of manager experience. I didn't have any sort of leadership experience. And I was taking a break from college, and so at this point I would have been about 20, and I was working with a bunch of 16-year-olds, and so that's who I was managing. And managing is actually really difficult because it's telling people what to do. And in order for people to listen to you, you have to have a certain amount of assertiveness and a certain amount of confidence. And at this time, I was very humble, but more than that, I had kind of a low self-esteem. And so as a result, I didn't have that assertiveness or that confidence that I needed. And so I just have this really strong memory, and it's kind of silly, but I have this really strong memory of listening to Slipknot, right? And driving on the way to work. And I was just blasting Disaster Piece, and I was so pissed off because of the fact that previous shifts had not gone well. Basically, prior to this, things just weren't getting done the way they needed to, and then it was kind of falling on my head because I was the boss, right? And so really, I was just super pissed off because these 16-year-olds were making me look bad. And so I remember this day specifically where I went into work and I was angry. I was angry because people weren't listening to me and things weren't going well as a result. And I was angry at myself because I wasn't assertive enough. I wasn't a good manager at the time. And so I remember going into this shift and using this anger to direct me. And I want to make it clear, there are a lot of really crappy bosses out there. There are people who yell and who swear at their employees and who belittle their employees and make them feel bad. I never did any of those things. But instead what I did basically is I would just check up on people. People would get off task, and then I would remember how angry I was, and then I would tell them, hey, will you please focus on your task? And again, I never raised my voice. I never said anything mean. I was never violent or anything. And so I think that probably on the outside looking in, you wouldn't have known that I was angry, but I was definitely using that anger to guide me. And I think the same sort of thing extends to anything in life. I think that you can be angry about your position in life, and that can drive you to move forward, to change. I do think that anger is a natural human emotion, basically. I don't think it's a bad thing. As I've said, I think that if it's expressed in negative ways, then it very much is a bad thing. But the anger itself, that emotion, is not always a bad thing. There is such a thing as righteous anger, after all. And I think there are certain situations where you are justified in being angry. I think that if someone lies to you, or they cheat you, or they steal from you, then I think it's fair to be angry and to be pissed off. And I remember saying this in a conversation with a friend who felt that anger was a bad emotion. And I said that there are certain things where if you don't get angry about them, then you probably don't care about them. Because if someone hurts you, or a family member, a loved one, then I think that you should be angry about it. But I think that just because you're angry about it, that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be violent or, yelling or screaming or anything like that. And really, I don't think those are good things to be. In other words, what I'm saying is that anger can be destructive or it can be constructive. Anger is an emotion that's always compared to fire, right? Because fire is something that can be very destructive. It can burn down houses, and it can burn down fields, and it can destroy everything. But on the opposite end, whenever fire is controlled, it's very much a good thing. We use fire to cook our food. The sun is basically just a giant ball of fire, and it helps us. Fire can be used to create steam and to run engines, and it can be used to boil water and purify it. And fire can be used to work metal and to make swords if you want to do that. And so I think that comparing anger to fire it's a very old comparison, I think. And really, I think it's one of the best comparisons that you could possibly come up with. Because again, both can be destructive or both can be constructive. Fire can burn down an entire city, or it can be used in the creation and building up of a city. I listen to a lot of metal, and so anger is the driving emotion behind a lot of that style of music. And I think that's very much an example of a positive use of anger. If you're angry about something and then that inspires you to create, I think that's a good thing. Going back to the ice cream job I was talking about earlier, part of the reason why I left it was because I was angry and pissed off because I felt like I was being mistreated by the end of it. And so as a result, that caused me to go back to school, and school was where I first made my short film, which is the very first video on this channel. And so that kind of indirectly led to the birth of this channel. I don't think that being angry and pissed off has to result in you yelling or screaming or punching people or destroying things. I think a lot of people have a lot of repressed anger, and I think that makes them dangerous. At least in America, where everyone has a car, road rage is very much a dangerous and scary thing. There are a lot of crazy drivers. And so again, I think anger is kind of like any other emotion, where I think that it can be used for bad or for good. And so basically, to wrap things up, as I'm saying, I don't think that anger necessarily has to be a bad thing. It's certainly a negative emotion. It's not something that's fun to feel. It's not something that's fun to rest with, but I think that that uncomfortability can cause you to move forward and can cause you to take action in the world. And I think this is an idea that you see a lot in like shows and stuff. You see it with Zuko in the Avatar series. I don't think that anger is necessarily a sustainable fuel for action, but I think it can help you get the rocket off the ground, so to speak. Because if you're angry for 40 years straight, that's not good. That's not good. That's gonna, ruin your health. But going back to my ice cream job, I think that once I figured out how to be a manager and once I figured out how to kind of organize my shifts and whatever, I think I was a lot less angry. But it was that anger that initially kicked that off. It was that anger that served as an impetus to change. So that's what I got. Thank you for watching. Have a nice night. I'm going to the gym. Goodbye.